On this second Sunday in Advent, I've entitled my thoughts, Love Draws Near, and we'll be looking at one of Isaiah's famous prophecies about the coming Messiah. Love draws near. This assertion sounds so simple, but when it's true, it's life-altering. The story of Jesus is one of love drawing near. For God so loved the world that he sent his one and only Son. That's the cherished Christian declaration of love drawing near. There are many ways in which love can be defined, but genuine love will always be associated with direction. Love moves toward, never away. The parable of the Good Samaritan is so impacting because two religious people moved away from a needy victim while an unexpected person moved toward. Jesus' life was characterized by moving toward those who were often the outcasts of society. In contrast, those who should have welcomed Jesus and moved toward him rejected him. As the gospel writer John put it, he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. That's in John 1:11. All of this means that God is love because God moves toward. God draws near. In fact, one of the names for Jesus, which we celebrate during Advent, highlights the truth of God moving toward. The gospel writer Matthew quoted the well-known prophecy of Isaiah that we'll look at today with the following words. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. That's in Matthew 1:23. The funny thing is, the famous prophecy announcing Emmanuel, or God drawing near, was given to a man who had absolutely no interest in God drawing near. Ahaz, king of Judah who lived in Jerusalem, was the initial recipient of Isaiah's famous prophecy about Emmanuel. Ahaz had the privilege of being a direct descendant of King David, but he gave no thought to living up to that legacy. 2 Kings chapter 16 and 2 Chronicles 28 both paint a picture of a worthless king who single-handedly appeared bent on bringing destruction to his own kingdom of Judah. Their joint indictment was that, unlike David, Ahaz did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He set up idols. He had an altar built in Jerusalem, which was modeled after an Assyrian altar in Damascus. And he lost 120,000 soldiers in one day to the northern kingdom of Israel. But Ahaz's greatest notoriety was reserved for the despicable fact that he sacrificed his sons in the fire in favor of the gods of other nations rather than serving the God who had established the kingdom of David. Ahaz was not a nice man. Ahaz ruled during a time when the downs in Jerusalem were definitely outnumbering the ups. The northern kingdom of Israel under King Pekah was aligning itself with Syria under King Rezin to march against Jerusalem with its terrified residents. It makes us wonder, what was Isaiah's state of mind as he responded to God's instructions to go and meet the wicked Ahaz down by the aqueduct? What was Ahaz doing down there? Had he just sacrificed another of his sons out of fear of the coming invasion? Was he checking to see how much water was in storage in case of a siege? With the destruction of the kingdom looking imminent, you'd think that Ahaz would have been ready for God to draw near, but such was not the case. This is what we find recorded in Isaiah 7, verses 1 to 16, and my apologies for the mispronunciation of names. This is what it says. When Ahaz, son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, was king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. Now, the house of David was told, Aram has allied itself with Ephraim. So the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken, as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out, you and your son Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the launderer's field. Say to him, 'Be careful, keep calm, and don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two smoldering stubs of firewood, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and of the son of Remaliah. Ephraim and Remaliah's son have plotted your ruin, saying, Let us invade Judah. Let us tear it apart and divide it among ourselves, and make the son of Tabeel king over it.' Yet this is what the sovereign Lord says. It will not take place. It will not happen. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be too shattered to be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all." Again the Lord spoke to Ahaz, "Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights." But Ahaz said, "I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test." Then Isaiah said, "Hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of humans? Will you try the patience of my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. He will be eating curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. For before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste." We do not know what exactly Ahaz was doing at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the launderer's field. We do know that Ahaz should have been ecstatic at Isaiah's words to not worry about the kings that were marching against Jerusalem. Having Isaiah call the invading kings smoldering stubs of firewood ought to have been music to Ahaz's ears. It sounded like the flames had gone out of their advance so that they could easily be brought out under control. In fact, the invasion from the two enemy kings need not even happen at all, according to the prophecy, because the advancing nations would themselves end up being destroyed within 65 years. But there was a catch. Ahaz had to believe. Ahaz had to change his allegiance from foreign gods to the God of Israel. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all, Isaiah proclaimed. Some things never change. Faith has always been the one and only way to connect with God. How, though, would Ahaz prove his faith to the God of Israel? God offered Ahaz an opportunity which we would have expected him to jump at. Isaiah told Ahaz, "Ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights." Who of us wouldn't have loved to have been in Ahaz's shoes? The biggest difficulty we would expect would be to decide which sign to ask for. He could have asked for fire from heaven like Elijah. He could have asked for a plague upon his enemies. He could have even asked for manna from heaven. Ahaz did none of that. Ahaz, pretending to be pious, responded, "I will not put the Lord to the test." Poor Ahaz was about to discover that you should never give a religious-sounding excuse for being disobedient to God. By refusing to ask God for a sign, Ahaz was rejecting God's offer to draw near. Ahaz was standing in the way of God demonstrating love to David's kingdom. Instead of welcoming God's loving offer to draw near, 2 Chronicles 28 records that Ahaz actually closed up the entrances to the temple, destroyed its furnishings, and set up altars to foreign gods on every corner. The sad result was that Ahaz became the last direct descendant of David to be a completely independent king, and Jerusalem came increasingly under the control of Assyria. Because of Ahaz's insolence, God himself proposed the sign which has been celebrated throughout the history of Christianity, and especially at Advent. The virgin, or young maiden, will be with child and will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. The sign of Emmanuel proves that genuine love cannot be blocked from drawing near. God was determined to draw near whether Ahaz would invite him or not. Even though we celebrate Emmanuel, we should not overlook the troubling lesson in this sordid account of Ahaz. Like Ahaz, we may not be prepared for love to draw near. We casually assume that love is always welcome, but Ahaz proved that it's not. Ahaz would certainly have been happy if God had swooped down and kept the enemy from invading Jerusalem, but he also wanted to keep God at a comfortable distance. If we complain at times that God seems distant, maybe we should consider if we want God to be really close. Ahaz demonstrated that there are reasons why it might feel uncomfortable to have God's love draw near. For instance, love brings responsibility. Even though Deuteronomy 6:16 specifically stated that no one should put God to the test, Ahaz was just putting on a hypocritical mask of religiosity by refusing God's offer to ask for a sign or a test. Abraham, Moses, Gideon, Jonah, Isaiah, really anybody who was somebody in the Bible got signs from God. Perhaps you remember the story of Gideon and his fleeces. I think Ahaz revealed a common problem. It's easy to be afraid of having too much expected from us. If Ahaz had asked for a sign, he would have borne the responsibility of following God's leadership, and he was not about to give up his vile independence. Also, love offers intimacy. Ahaz hadn't invited either God or God's prophet Isaiah to go with him on his jaunt down by the aqueduct, and he wasn't likely pleased at being followed there. No wonder. Isaiah caught Ahaz in a moment of fear, and none of us looks our best when we are afraid. I suspect that Ahaz didn't appreciate having one of his weakest moments exposed, and maybe we feel the same way. Love sounds great as long as we can hold on to some of our secret skeletons. And then love requires trust. God offered Ahaz an incredible opportunity, but it demanded trust. God wanted Ahaz to trust him so that he could experience freedom from his nation's enemies. But instead, 2 Kings 16 tells us that Ahaz made a deal with King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria to save him from the king of Aram. Ahaz was more interested in controlling his own destiny than in trusting God. Does that sound familiar? There are two big lessons to which we ought to pay attention. First, in order for us to receive love, we have to allow love to draw near. Sometimes the reason we don't feel loved is because we don't allow God or people to move toward us. Like Ahaz, we want to keep a distance rather than facing the responsibility, the intimacy, and the trust which result from love drawing near. The second lesson, which we should not ignore, is that we can evaluate our own love for someone by simply asking ourselves if we are moving toward that person or away. Listening attentively, for instance, is an act of moving toward. Brushing someone off is moving away. Joining someone in an activity they enjoy more than us is an act of moving toward. Refusing to join someone in their favorite activity is an act of moving away. We can learn a lot from cataloging our movements toward and away. Emmanuel proves that God's purpose is always to move toward us. Advent invites us to evaluate ourselves and ask if we are ready to have love draw near.